Sure.
So we'll talk some of those high-level takeaways from the Bears-Packers game that we started talking about at the beginning of the show. Carmen, I will let you have the floor first. What is your matchup that matters here with the Vikings traveling to Chicago?
Yeah, it's a really overarching one. It's Thomas Brown, the Bears' new offensive play caller, against Brian Flores. And that has to be it, because for as encouraging as things were against the Green Bay Packers, again, a divisional opponent, the divisional opponent, if you're a Bears fan. I mean, these are the big bad Packers, that team in the North that no one wants to see, that just have the Bears number and have. Jordan Love has been transferred the deed to Soldier Field and the Bears from Aaron Rodgers, and it has not lost to them yet as a starting quarterback. But Thomas Brown was able to do so many good things in such a short amount of time for Chicago once they fired Shane Waldron. They did not they fired him on Tuesday. So you're already losing 24 to 36 hours at that point, at least publicly. That matters when you're trying to come up with not only a game plan, but you're trying to right the entire ship at this point, with a playbook that is already installed. So there was already handcuffs on you if you're Thomas Brown trying to figure out, all right, how can I operate within this playbook that these guys already have the installs, but then utilize them a little bit more correctly. And what we saw on Sunday against the Bears was there was a lot more quick passes, a lot more quick reads for Caleb Williams. He was a little bit more willing to use his legs, which Caleb told us afterwards was really because he just saw lanes opening up, run lanes opening up more so than he had previously. And the biggest thing for me was the increased rate of motion, the pre-snap motion that the Bears had been lacking up until that point. They had the third fewest motion snaps in the first 10 weeks of the season, despite staying in 11 personnel, which is very indicative of the Sean McVay tree offense, the 11th highest rate in the league. They weren't varying their personnel groups, but then they also weren't putting any window dressing on those personnel groups. So pre-snap motion just lets you determine so many different things prior to the snap. It can gain you leverage. It can get safety's eyes out of place and out of position. It can, turn things on the defense's heels if you're the offense, and it can also tell the quarterback so many different things. It can indicate man versus zone. It can indicate so many things for the quarterback so that he knows more of what to expect post snap. And that's what we saw with Thomas Brown. The Bears used motion at the fourth highest rate then in the league through the Sunday's games this past week. So that was immediately something that was completely different. You saw it even early on in the game because the Bears got almost back. I don't think it was back-to-back, but they were penalties very close together that were like either illegal shifts or illegal motions. And you were like, oh man, this team just isn't used to this yet. And you saw it get better as the game went on. So now you're going against a very complex defense that doesn't behave how traditional defenses do. Your players don't behave in traditional defensive roles in Brian Flores' defense. You have all of these guys. You have guys dropping into coverage you're not expecting. You have guys up on the line you're not expecting. You have guys coming in on pressure or not. It's a whirlwind, and it puts quarterbacks in a blender, especially if you're not used to seeing NFL defenses, which Caleb Williams is still young. It's still his first season. He hasn't seen a lot when it comes to all of this kind of sophisticated stuff. So how much information can you get him if you're Thomas Brown before the snap, which is not only what you're telling him in the headset, but it's also, keeping up that rate of motion and making adjustments as you go based on what you're seeing from the defense and how they're playing you. That's, again, something that was lacking under Shane Waldron. So this is a battle between what Thomas Brown can do and adjust to now that there is film of him as the Bears play caller. Can he continue to evolve? Can you continue to self-scout and then adjust in game against a defense that you're going to need to do it against?
Yeah, I mean, one, I think that was all very beautifully said, and I'm going to kind of piggyback off a couple of that because that is also my matchup that matters. This sucks for Caleb. I mean, there's no other way around it. This matchup sucks for Caleb Williams. And if he plays well in this environment against the Minnesota Vikings and the Brian Flores defense, even though it is at home, man, that is a major hat tip to him going in the right direction, him having a lot of confidence in Thomas Brown as the play caller, because you're right. A lot of things were different. They were doing a lot more pre-snap motion, but it's more than that too. They were under center. I think the third most snaps of any game that they had up to this point in the season. They were tied for first in most play action snaps for a single game. at this point in the season. So it was the third fastest time to throw for Caleb Williams. So all in all, it just looked different. The whole thing looked different, and it looked a lot more like what we have been asking. Make things a little bit simpler for him, okay? Right. Don't make him sit here with no pre-snap motion, with nothing under center, with no threat of play action, and have him sit back and try to diagnose defenses pre and post snap within the first 2 seconds of a play. Why are you doing that? The whole scouting report with Caleb Williams was going to be what? It's got to look different than it did at USC. There were some parts of the USC game that you would have loved to marry into the NFL, and he gives you that talent level to be able to do that. But you knew he wasn't going to be able to just sit back there for 4, 5, 6 seconds and then escape and then just continue to look down the field. It doesn't really work in the NFL. It's got to be more structured than that. You have to give him help. And it did not feel like Shane Waldron was giving him help. And obviously it was great. It was a lot better last week. As Dalton Wasserman said on the Monday show, we were actually talking about Anthony Richardson, but this actually goes with the Chicago Bears and Caleb Williams and Thomas Brown again. All right, great. Do it again, right? That's always what coaches say to players when things are going well, when they have a good day. It's like, hey, that was great. Do it again. And that's sort of where we're at with the Chicago Bears. It's a tough test to quote unquote do it again, but I want to see more of those things that allow Caleb to have some more confidence, because he felt like he had a lot more confidence back there, the confidence to see those rushing lanes, the confidence to not just be anchored in between the two tackles and prove to everybody that he's this pocket passer. Dude, we know you can be a pocket passer, but also part of why you were drafted number 1 overall is to take off and run. It's that athletic ability, and he's finding that balance. It's tough to find that balance against the Flores defense. There's no doubt about it. We will see what happens. He was pretty good against the blitz last week. He was 8 for 10, 87 yards, 8 completions, gaining a first down against the blitz last week. But we'll see if he could do that against a Flores blitz, because that is different. On the other side of things, I'm going to talk about my plus factor here, and that is really the Vikings run game in the red zone. It's not like necessarily like a plus factor for a player. It's more of the Vikings rush game in the red zone. I think it was last week, maybe it was the week before. I was talking about Sam Darnold, and I was like, hey, things are going well. They're winning football games, but Darnold's turning the ball over more than any other quarterback in the NFL, specifically in the red zone and when throwing in the red zone. That's not good. There's also a stat that I got the idea from Ian Hartitz, who tweeted it out, and it was an Aaron Jones stat, and I went and I just looked at the Vikings overall. Carmen, the Vikings run game within the 5-yard line this year, so 5 yards to the goal line, 5 yards to the end zone, they're 25th in the NFL in rushing grade. They're 31st in the NFL at EPA per rush, and they have 11 carries for -4 yards.
Oof.
That's not, when you get within the 5-yard line,
right,
your run game's got to be a lot more reliable than that.
At the very least, don't go backwards.
So when you combine not being able to run the football within the 5-yard line and turning the ball over when you get into the red zone in the pass game, this is, again, more of a take a step back and go, okay, when we predict how far the Vikings could go this season, if they don't fix those two things, you get up against some teams that are really good in the playoffs and you got to go on a run here. That's got to be a lot better than what it has been 11 weeks into the season. So that's my plus factor there. Vikings run game once we get into those goal situations within the 5.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I have it on the other side of things too. Well, actually both sides, so it goes along with yours. It's just the Bears in the red zone, whether that's on offense or defense. Because defensively, and for everything that you just talked about and how much Minnesota has struggled inside the red zone, Bears defense is the best red zone defense in the league. They are only allowing a touchdown on 40.63% of red zone trips. Like, they are shut down within the 20. But then on the offensive side of the ball, you have a little bit of room for improvement, although they are still top 10 in red zone offense at 60.87%. It's just been a matter of getting into the red zone. I really do think that it's going to come down to which team can capitalize inside the 20, and especially in those goal-to-go situations. And then that's going to determine who essentially wins this game. But if the Bears can hold up their end of the bargain like they have been on defense, that should bode well for them then. And then to be able to punch it in and just get to the red zone on offense, then you're pretty good as far as the Bears offense goes as well. So I'm just interested to see how that kind of materializes again when you're talking about doing it again with Thomas Brown, and now that he's figured out not only Caleb but how to use those running backs and when to use those running backs, and maybe using Roschon Johnson with a lead blocker of an offensive lineman rather than handing the ball off to the offensive lineman at the goal line. I don't know. I honestly, that happened when it happened against the Packers. I was like, I kind of just chuckled to myself in the press box. I was like, oh, was that like a little dig? Was that like a little bit like a
yeah, it might have been. It honestly might have been.
Like, we're just like, we're gonna do things right now. This was like an indication of we're gonna run this play and we're gonna run it right. Even though it hasn't been before. I don't know. It was my petty little heart just kind of fluttered a little bit.
Coaches, they're a lot more petty than we think, honestly.
Yes.
Thanks for watching, everybody. Make sure you like and subscribe the video. And if you don't have a PFF Plus subscription, you can get one to see all the premium stats that we talked about here on the show, plus the expert betting and fantasy advice over at subscribe.pff.com. The description is also right below. So if you are not a PFF Plus subscriber, you can come one today.